Discover the incredible journey, how a billionaire's week as a janitor was transformed by a touch of humanity. James Westbrook woke up that morning in his luxurious Chicago penthouse, the skyline glimmering through polished glass windows, entirely hollow. The weight of influence and the opulence of his life, once intoxicating, felt like an anchor dragging him to an abyss. Successful CEO of a tech empire, surrounded by the elite, his wealth seemed inadequate against the gnawing emptiness that lurked within. Beneath tailored suits and designer shoes, a desperate longing stirred. His thoughts twisted into a knot of confusion. Where was the connection to the values that had once guided him? That tether to meaningful existence now felt frayed. On a whim, propelled by an urgent need for rediscovery, he decided to pose as a janitor at Lincoln High School, a slap in the face to his status but almost an exhilarating thought. Could scrubbing floors bring him back to earth, remind him what real work meant? As he pulled on an oversized uniform, the material scratchy and worn, apprehension set in. Would he really do this? His peers would scoff, calling it absurd. Yet, the thought pushed itself forward. This was more than a costume. It was a desperate attempt to reconnect. Every swish of his mop was like a gateway flicking open. Day after day, James found himself entwined in the lives of students clashing against the walls of circumstance. Earl, the school's janitor, became his unassuming guide, wrapping him in stories of family, perseverance, and a relentless pursuit of modest dreams. Each tale evoked emotions James long buried. But as he cleaned, his heart was torn open when he met Mia. Brilliant, passionate, her spark was undeniable, flickering in stark contrast to the cloudy financial strain she bore. Each encounter unveiled her dreams of science and innovation, aspirations choked by her family's melting finances. James felt an unfamiliar pull. Wanting to support her, he crafted a plan to share his knowledge, taking strides to mentor from the shadows. Yet, the stakes elevated and the gaping chasm of truth gnawed ever wider. What were his own corporate actions fueling? Greed and growth, that's what kept the thrill alive, yet he questioned, was this truly the legacy he wanted? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. The pressure mounted like storm clouds on the horizon as a pompous school board member took the stage during a public meeting, belittling Mia's ambitions. The harsh words echoed through the gymnasium, a deafening reminder of the divisions he never wanted to witness. Anguish spooled within him. Here was a child fighting with all her might and being dismissed, just an inconsequential whisper amidst powerful voices. Earl's voice trembled in his memory, urging not just awareness but action. As the final school bell rang, James stood paralyzed, the weight of his choices pulling him taut. Should he let complacency reign, return to his cushy office, slip back into indifference? Or should he dig deep within, not just to mentor Mia, but rise against the very system he helped solidify? Hope and fear collided fiercely in his chest. The air crackled, a climax building in his gut. Could he risk everything he built, igniting a rebellion of heart against hardened profit? The question loomed heavy as the door swung shut behind him, shadows of the future calling him. James Westbrook stepped out of Lincoln High, the weight of the world swirling around him, threatening to suffocate. The fluorescent lights overhead had faded behind him, along with the laughter and complaints of students who, despite their worries, held a certain vibrancy. They lived with hope, dreams bubbling beneath their small-town realities. He felt almost repulsed by his own detachment, the contrast stark against their untainted aspirations. The drive home was a haze. He barely registered the skyline he once admired, now mere steel and glass giants that felt foreign to him. Every turn of the wheel echoed his internal conflict. He was torn between the gilded illusion of success and the raw authenticity of his experiences over the past week. Yet, one thing began to crystallize in his mind: he wanted to change, to do something beyond himself. For one brief moment, he felt inspired until doubt clawed back in. He found himself back in the penthouse, sitting in silence. The majestic view now taunted him. He caught his reflection in the glass, a man wrapped tightly in a cocoon of wealth, yet yearning for a light outside it. Questions hammered at him: had he ever really considered the impact of his actions? Eager to innovate, was he only stifling creativity among those who could not afford to fail? The feelings of inadequacy bubbled up, intensifying until he could no longer ignore them. James reached for his phone, contemplating an actionary message to Mia, an attempt to reach out with encouragement. But as his fingers hovered over the screen, he hesitated. What would he say? Keep dreaming? No, it rang hollow against her cries for authenticity in a world that clipped her wings. He needed to offer more than hollow platitudes. That night, sleep was evasive. Instead, his mind raced with images of Mia, her fierce spirit, battles won and lost in the confines of budgetary limitations and societal expectations. It felt sacrilegious not to intervene, not to leverage his knowledge for something greater than his own wealth. A plan began to form, a vision to counterbalance the stark indifference he had perpetuated for years. He was no longer just an observer. Maybe, just maybe, he could become an advocate. What if he arranged after-school workshops, providing real-world insight, technology education, and mentorship directly to students like Mia? The edge of excitement danced at the thought, weaving through the shadows of uncertainty. The next day, at Lincoln High, James embraced his role anew. He approached Earl, who was busy polishing the floors, and shared his realization. I want to do more for the kids, Earl. I'm thinking workshops, bringing in tech experience, whatever it takes to help them thrive. Earl looked up, astonished. You've got a heart heavier than I expected, Mr. Westbrook, he chuckled warmly. They need someone like you. Encouraged, James began mapping out the workshops, envisioning a safe space where ideas could flourish, and students didn't just dream, they created pathways to their own futures. He drafted an email to the school board, meticulously outlining his plan. But in the midst of this newfound hope, doubts surfaced. What if the board rejected him out of hand? What if they saw him as nothing more than a washed-up millionaire trying to buy moral currency? The deeper he dove into his plan, the greater the fear of confrontation loomed ahead. As he submitted the email, pressing send felt like launching himself into a chasm without a safety net. Would he push forth against the titan of corporate bureaucracy, or fall flat, swallowed by the very complacency from which he sought to escape? The sting of uncertainty adapted into determination. James stepped back, steeling himself for what lay ahead. The moment of truth approached. The school board meeting was upon him. Would he be taken seriously, or would they dismiss him like a nobody? He had to face this head-on. Time to confront the very system he spent years supporting. The school board room was a crucible of intimidation, with its imposing dark wood paneling and the cold, dismissive stares from an array of suits. James felt small despite being large in stature, dwarfed not just by the room's decor but by the weight of his own convictions. He had rehearsed the speech 100 times, but standing in front of these individuals who looked as if they were part of an unassailable elite almost made him wish he could turn and flee. He steadied his breath, grounding himself in the realization that he wasn't here to seek approval, but to advocate for something greater than himself. Sweat trickled down his back as he took his position. Before him lay a sea of apprehensive faces, each one refusing to reveal anything other than cultivated neutrality. The chair creaked as he shifted, thoughts of doubt flickering like malfunctioning lights in his mind. Thank you for allowing me to speak, he began, forcing his voice to resonate with an authenticity he desperately hoped to convey. I'm James Westbrook. For years, I've been focused on success in a world driven by profit margins, but I realized I want to invest in a different currency: hope. The murmurs around the room increased as skepticism took shape on some faces. He continued, letting the fire of his conviction fuel him. I propose that we host workshops after school opportunities where students can explore technology, build skills, and engage with mentors from various fields. We have a chance to bridge the gap between aspiration and reality." Each word peeled back layers of fear, exposing the raw urgency underneath. This was not merely about technology, it was about sparking something in those young minds that society had often stifled. Yet, as he spoke, he noticed the board members shifting in their seats, exchanging glances that hinted at concern. "We appreciate the effort, Mr. Westbrook," a woman with sharp features interrupted, her tone condescending. "But you're asking us to divert resources we simply don't have. Our current budget barely accommodates necessities." He had prepared for this. "I'm not looking to siphon resources," he countered, feeling a surge of unexpected defiance. "I want to bring in sponsorships, mentorships, and even some of my resources to facilitate this vision, to ignite these kids' passions." The words flew out, each one heavy with desperation and hope. The board members remained skeptical, and a knot tightened in his stomach. They were visibly unconvinced, debating softly among themselves while he stood vulnerable, exposed to their scrutiny. It was a moment that tested the core of his resolve. He questioned if he could actually make a change or if he was merely a transient character in their indifferent narrative. Finally, the chair of the board, a burly man with white hair and an air of authority, gestured for silence. "Your passion is admirable, Mr. Westbrook, but I must remind you that education is not a business venture. Your intentions, though good, may not translate well in our environment." His heart sank, but with it came a flicker of resilience. He forced himself to stand taller. "Is that really all it takes? To be buried under finances and status quo? If I can learn anything from the kids, it's that hope and innovation often rise from the most unlikely sources." The words hung in the air like a challenge. In that moment, as eyes pierced through him, James felt the weight of his convictions solidify. He wasn't just advocating for a project, he was confronting a mindset. Yet, deep within, uncertainty tangled with determination. Could he dismantle this wall of bureaucracy, this tradition that clung fast to the past? As he exited the boardroom, his heart pounded in resistance. The looming question hovered: what if they rejected not just the idea, but him as well? He had rolled the dice, wagered his wealth against the essence of something pure, but the outcome remained painfully undefined. A flurry of doubt stalked him, mingled with an increasing urgency. There had to be a way to convince the board, to forge a path that would turn the tide. He needed another plan, a drastic approach that would pierce through their hesitance. And as the door swung shut behind him, James took a breath of resolve, plotting his next move. The moment for transformation was drawing close. Would he find a way to turn their indifference into acceptance? It was clear now his fight was just beginning. James paced the corridor outside the boardroom, the fluorescent lights buzzing around him, mirroring his racing thoughts. The adrenaline from the meeting clung to his skin, urging him to confront his next move. A stroll through the gilded halls felt incongruous to his internal chaos. He felt like a stranger amidst the polished veneer of affluence. What struck James wasn't simply the rejection of his idea, it was the tightening grip of the systemic inertia he faced. They were not just unsure, they were uninterested. The weight of that realization was heavy. But it also brewed a storm of determination deep within him. He couldn't let acceptance be that easy. There had to be a spark he could ignite to catch their attention and peel back their layers of indifference. He decided to focus back on what he could control: his narrative. James retreated to his office, each step marking a commitment to a different path. The space felt suffocating, its neat and sterile setup clashing with the tumult brewing inside. As he settled at his desk, he focused on the technical prowess he had accumulated over the years, developing software, managing projects, leading teams that had long seemed disconnected from this mission. Perhaps it was time to leverage not just his passion but his professional skills to craft a compelling presentation. He opened his laptop, his fingers flying over the keys. Ideas cascaded into structured plans on the screen. A series of workshops could be reframed not merely as educational programs, but as a series of challenges with tangible rewards, a competition that could ignite the students' competitive spirits. Each workshop could culminate in a showcase where their projects would be displayed before local sponsors, community members, and even the board. This change in focus could shift the entire narrative, a call to action rather than a request for charity. The further he delved into this approach, the more excitement bubbled within him. He aimed to create a framework for sponsorship that included clear ROI for businesses. By positioning this initiative as a partnership, he could earn credibility in the eyes of the board, who viewed skepticism not as a challenge, but as a shield against risk. Yet as he plotted the details, shadows of self-doubt resurfaced. Was it so simple? Could he transform this passion project into a digestible business model? Uncertainty danced in the corners of his mind. He remembered the interaction from earlier, the board's impassive faces, the resigned attitudes of authority. But those weren't the only voices in this symphony of doubt. What of the students? Their eyes lit up at the mention of technology, their ambition bubbling forth during every chance encounter. Fueled by their energy, James set a time frame. He would present this revised proposal by the end of the week. No more backtracking. He would face them again armed with a plan that tied his vision to tangible results, integrating his strengths in technology with the hopes of students. As he drafted emails to local businesses, seeking their involvement ahead of time, a shiver of anticipation coursed through him. This was more than just an idea revisited, it was an urgent creative rebellion against the bureaucracy's stagnation. But an underlying apprehension lingered. What if the new proposal faced the same apathy? Would they only see calculations and strategies, dismissing the human element? The pressure mounted as he contemplated the members of the board who had belittled his intentions only hours prior. The time had come to face them again. He gritted his teeth, piecing together his resolve. This was a juncture that could define him not just as an educator, but as an advocate willing to confront the status quo. As the clock ticked closer to the deadline, James believed he could breathe new life into this initiative. But a knot tightened in his stomach, realizing the weight of repercussions as well. And while he drafted his strategy, one question floated to the forefront: would he be able to transform their hardened skepticism into curiosity? With every keystroke, he moved towards an unknown future, bracing himself for the confrontation that lay ahead. Would he be prepared to face the board's scrutiny, even if they proved just as unyielding as before? James woke early the next morning, the sound of his alarm pulling him from a restless sleep. The hours spent tossing and turning were marked by feelings of anticipation, lingering doubts swirling like a thunderstorm in his mind. He rubbed his eyes, knowing the day ahead would require every ounce of his focus and determination. After a quick shower, he stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror and whispered motivational mantras that now felt more like a desperate incantation than profound wisdom. You are capable. You are prepared. Yet, beneath the surface, a cacophony of thoughts challenged this facade of confidence. What if he stumbled over his words? What if the board chairman's stony face only reflected more apathy? Once in the office, he was greeted by the usual sterile environment of his workspace. The cold, metallic aroma of the air conditioning mingled with the faint scent of burnt coffee from the break room. He took a deep breath, steeling himself, and dove back into his plan, reviewing the presentation slides with a critical eye. Each slide needed to be unassailable, a harmonious blend of data, appeal, and emotional resonance. He envisioned his audience, those members of the board with decades of experience behind them, their hearts presumably draped in caution. What techniques could he employ to pull them from their inertia? They required more than mere statistics, they needed vision. He recalled the ways the tech conferences he had attended had emphasized engagement over numbers. As he worked, flashes of clarity washed over him. He began to present each segment as if harnessing a story, weaving tales of past students who had emerged victorious from challenging situations. He imagined the excitement on their faces, the hope in their eyes when presented with new opportunities. Those images breathed new life into his slides, transforming sterile recommendations into a narrative rich with potential. But doubt reared its head once again. Could he share the human side without sounding overly sentimental, thus further fueling their skepticism? He needed a method to relay the urgency and merit of the initiative while ensuring that they felt a part of the process, not merely observers distanced from its impact. There was a fine balance, one he had to manipulate skillfully. By midday, his palms were clammy, and a low hum of anxiety twisted in his gut. He decided to take a break, stepping outside into the bright light of the afternoon. The fresh air enveloped him, and he watched the shifting clouds, searching for clarity in their ever-changing forms. Each drift reminded him that change required motion, that inaction was the true enemy, not merely the bored's indifference. Returning to his office, he redirected his attention to an email from a local business he had contacted earlier. They expressed interest in collaborating, praising his visionary framing of the workshops. Their potential engagement seemed to ignite another wave of excitement, replacing the anxiety etched into the lines of his brow. Perhaps he could create a synergy that encompassed fresh perspectives, an alliance that showcased his initiative while reaffirming their business model. In the midst of organizing his thoughts, he received a message from a student expressing eagerness to participate in the workshops. That reminder of purpose prompted a swift kick of motivation. It wasn't about convincing the board, it was about advocating for the students who relied on guidance and opportunity. Taking a deep breath, James leaned back in his chair, allowing the surge of conviction to chase away the remnants of doubt. But as he finalized his presentation, a new sense of urgency filled him. The board meeting wasn't just a formality, it was an extraordinary crossroads, a moment where his resolve would either be fortified or shattered. With the deadline looming and uncertainty once again creeping in, he closed his laptop as the sun set outside. A newfound determination anchored him. This wasn't just a proposal, it was a plea wrapped in a vision for the future. James picked up a pen and struck through a line in his notes. Will they listen? He wrote instead, how will I make them curious? As he stood to leave, the quiet of the evening settled around him, leaving behind the undeniable tension of what lay ahead. With the sharp weight of his ambitions growing heavier in his pocket, he pondered how this pivotal confrontation would redefine not only his project but, potentially, his own aspirations. Would curiosity overcome skepticism, or would he walk away marked as an outsider once more? As the first rays of morning sun trickled through the window, James felt an unusual blend of clarity and anxiety coursing through him. Today was not just another day in the office, it was a defining moment. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, his reflection now seemed less like a mere image and more like a canvas, an opportunity for transformation. He dressed sharply, but beyond the crisp shirt and polished shoes, he strategized how to frame his delivery. He practiced breathing techniques to calm himself, visualizing the questions the board members might ask. Each inquiry would be a chance to expand on his vision. He envisioned responding with solutions not defensively, but with a sense of partnership and collaboration. Arriving at the office, the same metallic scent lingered, yet today it felt different. There was an electric hum that set a vibrant tone amid the sterile workspace. Instead of retreating into the shadows of doubt, James resolved to claim the space, making it his own. The charts and slides flickered on his screen as he prepared for the incoming storm of scrutiny. He revisited his presentation, conscious of how the narrative would influence the audience. The stories he had intended to tell about the students were no longer just tales to garnish statistics, they had grown into powerful testimonies of resilience. Which of their stories would resonate best? He highlighted moments of triumph that would evoke empathy instead of indifference. Even during the moments of solitude, James wrestled with the temptation to retreat into familiar insecurities. A thought struck him: what if he structured his presentation not just around their needs, but around collaboration? He envisioned a scenario where the board could envision themselves as co-creators of an initiative that would redefine futures. He had been relying too heavily on their preconceptions about engagement. Now, he focused on actively inviting them into the conversation. As the clock ticked closer to noon, he transformed his mounting anxiety into tangible energy. During his lunch break, a quick bite in the break room, he found himself in conversation with a colleague. "How do you handle these meetings?" he asked, and she casually shared her techniques for calming nerves, including the art of storytelling. Inspired by this exchange, a plan began to crystallize. Storytelling would not just illustrate his points, it would ingratiate him with the board members. When he returned to his desk, he began crafting a narrative arc for the meeting. Each point was now more than a bullet list, they were chapters of a larger story that demanded engagement. He included pauses for questions, inviting participation as if he were leading a discussion rather than delivering a monologue. But as the day unfolded, doubt crept back in, whispering insidious ideas into his mind. What if they dismissed his approach? What if his stories fell flat? James abruptly shut his laptop, taking a moment to clear his head. He realized this was a defining test of resolve. Could he forge genuine connections amid reluctance? He stared at his reflection in the window, the weight of expectation sharpening his focus. The office buzzed with the routine clinks of coffee mugs and the muted conversations of colleagues, but at that moment, they felt like an echo fading into the background. This meeting was personal. There was a thin line between professional ambition and personal conviction. He was on the verge of crossing it. Determined, he wrote on a sticky note, challenged them to engage, and pinned it above his monitor. James held fast to his vision, ready to step into the storm of incredulity with fierce determination. As he prepared to enter the conference room, a shiver of excitement coursed through him. He had earned this chance not merely to present, but to spark a conversation. What ignited his determination was the thought of standing before a table full of skeptics, challenging them to see past their reservations. And as he took a steadying breath, a single truth pierced through his resolve. This conversation was not just about the project, it was about his evolution as a leader. With the meeting imminent, the door swung open and James knew he was on the brink of an encounter that would either propel him forward or leave him grappling with profound uncertainty. Would he master the narrative, or would the doubts swallow him whole? As James stepped into the conference room, an electric pulse beat in the silence, underscoring the weight of expectation clinging to the air. The round table was surrounded by the board members, the very people whose skepticism had loomed over him like a shadow. They were busy adjusting their notes, exchanging whispered doubts, carving out a space for their own narratives. But this was no longer their story, it was his. With every ounce of training flooding his system, James embraced the same breathing techniques that had anchored him throughout the day. The first few moments felt surreal, almost like stepping into a theater, with the spotlight blaring down, forcing him to evoke confidence from every fiber of his being. He stood tall, refusing to let uncertainty dictate his posture. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice steady and resolute. He remembered the notion he had penned earlier, engaging them was key. "I don't want to just share numbers. I want to invite you into a narrative that is expanding and evolving, one that is focused on collaboration." The room seemed to shift. Faces veered away from distraction and toward him. He felt the stirrings of potential. Stepping into the first story, he illustrated the journey of a brilliant student whose life had been on the brink of collapse. This was a child not defined by their circumstances, but by the resolve to succeed against all odds. Each word painted vivid images of hope and resilience, emotions rising like a crescendo. He invited the board to ponder their part in this journey. Would they become mere spectators, or committed allies? The narratives were not simply anecdotes, they were mirrors reflecting possibilities, and he encouraged them to envision their fingerprints on the transformation of those lives. The gentle hum of realization flickered across the group as he pressed on, artfully weaving statistics into stories. Then, just as he found his rhythm, a voice sliced through the optimism. A board member raised an eyebrow, skepticism etched into his features. "But how can we ensure these initiatives are sustainable?" His voice was measured yet pointed, underscoring the hurdles that would inevitably arise. James felt the familiar swell of anxiety, yet he tapped into the conviction he had cultivated. "Sustainability comes from relationships," he replied, infusing his voice with earnestness. Our investment isn't just financial, it's emotional and communal. We can't treat this as a transaction, we must frame it as a partnership leading to growth. The back and forth felt organic, almost exhilarating. Questions flowed, there was resistance, but there was also curiosity, a lunging towards engagement. Each response built upon their inquiries, turning initial doubts into opportunities for deeper discourse. He was no longer an isolated voice, he was navigating a shared experience, shaping the dialogue through both conviction and inquiry. As the meeting unfolded, James discovered something within himself, his hidden competence to guide conversation rather than stall. Manipulating the narrative with deft skill, he allowed silence to linger when necessary, giving space for reflection. His own doubts were receding, replaced by the collective curiosity now thriving in the room. Despite the camaraderie bubbling amid the tension, he sensed an underlying swirl of reluctance from a few members. They found comfort in the status quo, hesitant to embrace change in any form. He couldn't abandon his resolve now, that was the pivotal moment. Reluctance echoed in their body language, arms crossed, eyes squinting. His heart raced, sensing another challenge emerging. Once we identify what truly matters, he said, stepping deeper into the fray, it isn't only you who stands to gain. It is every student who embodies hope, a reflection of your legacy. With that, he felt a surge, a revelation. Fighting against the tide of entrenched thinking was akin to chasing shadows, but challenging them outright called forth an introspection he never anticipated. Would they claim this vision alongside him or let it slip through their fingers? As James wrapped up the meeting, he was acutely aware of what was at stake. The dialogue held the potential for transformation, not just for the students, but for the board, and indeed for himself. He could feel the pressure building, like air before a storm, but he welcomed it. He had nudged their uncertainties, given them glimpses of what could be. But one big question remained: could he guide them to embrace the collaboration he envisioned, or would resistance win the day? Leaving the room with the weight of expectation balancing on his shoulders, he knew his journey was far from over. An unexpected silence crept in behind him, crackling with a sense of unfinished business. What awaited him next would alter his understanding of leadership profoundly. James stepped out of the conference room, his mind buzzing with the intensity of what had just unfolded. There was an unfamiliar exhilaration coursing through him, mingling with the lingering apprehension that clung to his thoughts. He had stood his ground before the board, carving out a vision that felt sustainable, collaborative, and weighty with potential. Yet, as the door swung shut behind him, a chill of reality washed over him. In the following days, he dove back into the trenches, meticulously mapping the feedback from the meeting. He could almost hear the clinking of coffee cups around the office as he mulled over the conversations, scrutinizing their reactions and nuances. Disappointment mingled with hope when he realized a few key members remained skeptical. Were they truly engaged or simply paying lip service to his ideas? James was determined not to let their doubts dampen his momentum. Each morning, as he reviewed his notes, he unearthed lessons from the meeting, moments of connection that had sparked insight, and the critical questions that begged for answers. This would not just be a recounting of his vision, he needed to back it with strategies, bolster it with data, and build tangible actions that would garner their trust. It was time to take a step back and redefine success, he thought. He crafted a detailed proposal that framed the mission not just as a lofty goal but as a series of achievable, measurable milestones that the board could visualize. This was about showing them not just what needed to be done, but how they could participate actively in these endeavors. With determination like a sharpened blade, he prepared for another meeting with the board. He knew their interests, he had dissected the skeptics' concerns and shaped his narrative around them. That day, he wore a tailored suit he'd reserved for special occasions, reflecting both professionalism and assertiveness. The suit felt like armor, a layer of protection that bolstered his resolve. As he stepped into the boardroom once more, the tension hung thick in the air. He addressed them with newfound composure, unveiling the proposal with confidence. Each slide on the projector came alive as he explained the rationality behind his plans. He illustrated the incremental steps they would take together, timelines laid out with clarity, ensuring everyone had a role to play. But even as he spoke, James recognized the flickers of skepticism dancing in their eyes. The board members exchanged glances, lingering doubts still nestled in the folds of their expressions. "I understand that change can be daunting," he ventured, reading the atmosphere like a seasoned navigator. "But I assure you, this is a path toward empowerment and legacy. The benefits hinge upon our collective resolve to embrace it." He paused, letting the silence offer its own weight. It was a calculated risk, but it resonated through the room. He could almost feel their inclination to consider the propositions more seriously. Then, he turned toward the most stalwart opponent, a woman who had been particularly vocal in her doubts. "You've seen evidence of what can be achieved through collaborative investments, haven't you?" She looked at him, brow furrowed, the moment stretching. "But will those investments truly resonate beyond just financial metrics?" James felt a familiar quiver. It was the moment of challenge he anticipated yet dreaded. He had to shift their thinking from transactional to transformational. "What we are building isn't merely financial, it's a legacy that instills belief in potential. Every dollar matters, yes, but so do every action and every relationship nurtured along the way." Her gaze softened a fraction as she absorbed his words. By the end of the meeting, the level of engagement intensified. Board members began to propose ideas, buoyed by the framework he had laid out. This was no longer just his project, they were starting to own it. Yet even as the meeting ended with tentative optimism, James felt an insatiable tension still bubbling beneath the surface. What if the momentum faltered when he wasn't present? What awaited him was a reality where he would have to frequently ignite the flame of enthusiasm, balancing between guiding the vision and maintaining their commitment. As he exited the room, an unsettling thought crept into his mind: would the tenacity he had discovered within himself be sufficient to sustain this growth long-term? Even as the world opened up with possibilities, shadows of doubt lingered in the corners of his mind, waiting for the right moment to seep back in. The moment was near when he would need to confront the depth of his own commitment and what sacrifices he would need to make to pave the road ahead. When the challenge came, would he possess the resolve to walk that line? James returned to his desk, the reverberations of the meeting still echoing in his mind. The applause at the end felt distant now, an ephemeral victory overshadowed by deeper questions. Could he sustain the emotional momentum he had gathered? As he sat, the words of the skeptical board member replayed in his head: will those investments truly resonate? He resolved that this wasn't just about presentations and proposals. It was about inspiring a transformation, a culture shift that transcended the confines of the boardroom. The jagged edges of doubt had to be smoothed over with clear vision and unwavering commitment, not only from him but from everyone involved. With this realization, he formulated a plan. He envisioned a series of workshops where every member of the team would participate. There, he would facilitate discussions, aiming to unveil not just the strategic importance of their goals, but instilling a sense of ownership within each individual. It became increasingly clear to him that leadership wasn't merely dictating actions, it was about cultivating an environment for shared growth and learning. That evening, as he worked late, the dim office lights cast long shadows on his desk, giving the space a cool, contemplative atmosphere. He drafted a new presentation for the workshops, focusing on personal investment rather than financial metrics. Each slide would link the company's vision with personal aspirations, threading a narrative that transcended everyday tasks. He infused the content with anecdotes and collaborative exercises, determined to evoke authentic engagement. In the days that followed, feedback began to trickle in, buoyed by visible excitement. One by one, team members showed up to discuss their vision for the project, their own stakes in its success. James felt a swell of pride with each contribution. Yet beneath this pride was the chilling reminder that his ability to catalyze this enthusiasm could slip away if not nurtured repeatedly. As workshop day approached, he felt a familiar wave of anxiety wash over him. The stakes seemed higher than ever. The initial enthusiasm of the board felt ephemeral. Their buy-in didn't guarantee continued dedication. James needed to think one step ahead, preparing for the possibility of waning interest or resistance. Just before the workshop, he encountered his most staunch critic in the hallway, the same woman whose skepticism plagued his thoughts. She was standing outside the meeting room, arms crossed, the air around her thick with uncertainty. "James," she started hesitantly, "I can't shake the feeling that this people-first approach could backfire. We need to hit targets, not hold hands." His pulse quickened. Did she really believe that? Could he disarm her with the same argument he'd used before? If we aren't invested in our people, then the targets we hit will be hollow accomplishments. Success must have a heartbeat, something more than just numbers. Her expression softened as she considered his words, and he took her silence as a cue to further his point. Imagine a future where everyone in this room not only understands the vision but feels part of it. This is a chance to create lasting pathways for innovation, and it starts with us believing together. James' heart raced, sensing he was finally punching through the barrier. It was a revelation. He discovered within himself a distinct capacity for dialogue and persuasion he hadn't fully acknowledged before. Yet the other side of that coin was lurking. A fear of failure loomed larger now that he recognized how vital his role truly was. As he stepped into the workshop, he felt the weight of 1,000 expectations and the flicker of doubt entwined with determination. Would his ability to connect with his colleagues truly awaken the spirit of collective action he yearned for, or was he setting them up for disillusionment when the reality of pressure inevitably returned? The moment loomed before him, and he realized with startling clarity that the road ahead was convoluted and uncertain. It would demand the very best of him, but he needed to ask himself, how far was he willing to go to forge a legacy out of this chaos? James stood at the precipice of possibility, and in that moment, he confronted a new truth: success rested not in numbers or metrics, but in the fulfillment of promises made not just to the board but to himself. The workshop unfolded with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. James stood at the front, feeling the eyes of his colleagues linger, their skeptical gazes heavy. The room was charged with the electricity of potential change, a change he hoped would resonate beyond spreadsheets and quarterly meetings. As he began to speak, James anchored his introduction in the power of shared purpose. "Today, let us redefine success together," he said, his voice steady. "This isn't merely about hitting targets, it's about empowering each other to innovate and grow. Our worth isn't encapsulated in metrics alone, it bubbles up from the heart of our community." He launched into stories of transformation, weaving the tales of students whose lives had shifted dramatically when given the opportunity. Their struggles and triumphs ignited sparks of connection among the board members. With every anecdote, he could see the shifting expressions of his colleagues, curiosity replacing cynicism. Yet, as the conversations expanded, James understood that conviction alone wouldn't suffice. He moved to include them actively in the process. "Let us break into pairs and discuss how your individual departments can contribute to this vision. I want you to feel ownership, your ideas matter." The ensuing discussion filled the room with a buzz of energy, palpable and contagious. Ideas flowed freely, each contribution reinforcing the collective narrative that had begun to weave itself into something greater. James wandered among the pairs, listening, prompting dialogue, his insatiable curiosity taking over. The barriers between him and the board began to dissolve. For the first time, they were collaborators, not simply skeptics. But doubt lingered just below the surface. The looming question in his mind remained: could this sense of collective purpose survive the pressure of everyday demands? As the session concluded, he felt a mixture of elation and anxiety. Transforming the board's skepticism into shared belief felt monumental, yet he knew real change took time and consistent effort. Days turned into weeks, and the commitment to the workshops remained steady, feeding a growing momentum within the company. Yet James was aware that every flame could extinguish, sustaining interest would be paramount. To do that, he needed to implement check-ins, regular evaluations that reinforced the progress made. The response was encouraging. Team members began to take pride in their contributions, sharing outcomes and challenges. James was witnessing growth not just in the students they aimed to help, but within their own culture as well. The once opaque boardroom walls began to echo with laughter and debate, a visual canvas of synergy. One late afternoon, as dusk settled over the city and shadows lengthened in the office, James received an unexpected email. The board had convened to reassess their initial hesitations and acknowledge the progress sparked by the workshop initiatives. A decision lay before him: significant funding was to be allocated to propel the workshops forward. As he read through the message, disbelief washed over him. The achievements of the past few months did not just reflect a shift in organizational thinking, they mirrored his own transformation. The impulse to serve was no longer an afterthought, it was the bedrock of his professional journey, challenging him to continually invest in both humanity and enterprise. The elation of recognition, however, brought with it a moment of clarity. It was about more than just accolades, it was about purpose, knowing the legacy he intended to carve. He was no longer simply a tech titan cloaked in luxury, he was becoming an advocate fostering innovation among young minds who dared to dream against adversity. James crafted responses, envisioning potential collaborations and new partnerships that could further expand their reach. Each keystroke was bursting with purpose. He was no longer cradled by fear or burdened by self-doubt. Ready to explore unknown territories, he embraced the mantle of leadership, confident and determined. Days later, standing in front of a room filled with eager students, he spoke of aspirations, resilience, and untapped potential. Their bright eyes reflected a shared understanding he was sowing the seeds of empowerment. This was no longer a journey singularly focused, it had become a collective expedition towards a common vision. James Westbrook was no longer adrift in an ocean of wealth. Instead, he had anchored himself in the tides of hope, camaraderie, and fearless ambition. This week had forever altered his trajectory, reminding him that the true measure of success transcended profits, it lay in the pathways created for others. The once hollow ache of his existence had morphed into a ripple effect of change. He had finally confronted complacency, allowing purpose to drive his passion. Standing tall, he recognized the depth of his journey, a meaningful transformation that would forever define who he was, a successful leader, an educator, and now a true advocate. This was only the beginning. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to subscribe now. This is the moment to show your support, and don't wait even one more second to share. Only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions.